So this is part 2 of our conversations around the new Kentucky Science Assessment System. As I talked about before, there are 3 different layers to the assessment system that we have to know a little bit more about. So we're going to start off talking around the classroom embedded assessment. And basically, this is just an ongoing process that really provides us the opportunity to seek and interpret evidence of the 3-dimensional science learning. So we're really looking to see at what level and depth of understanding are the kids approaching explanations of phenomenon around these 3 dimensions. We want the students to engage in 3-dimensional learning, but sometimes our assessments don't always need to be 3-dimensional. Sometimes they can be, but we also need to feel the freedom to create assessments that could even be 1-dimensional. Sometimes we might have an assessment that really just kind of gets to, do the kids understand this piece of content to the level of the standard? It might even be a small assessment around a science and engineering practice. I mean, one of our science and engineering practices is asking questions or defining a problem. So it could even be a simple common formative that assesses a science or engineering practice. It could even be a cross-cutting concept. How are our kids' understandings of patterns really evolving and growing throughout this understanding of a particular phenomenon? So don't feel obligated for every assessment that you utilize with your students to be 3-dimensional. The goal is 3-dimensional learning, but sometimes we have to look at it from different perspectives to really get an understanding of where our kids need to continue to grow. So a classroom embedded assessment is basically an in-class formative. It's teacher created. This isn't something that the state is going to create and hand down to you. This is going to be teacher created, pretty much like a common formative that we have now. It's definitely going to be common within your school. So just like in the data team process when you're looking at reading or math, you have a common formative assessment that you give, and then you get together and talk about the data. This is something very similar. You're going to have common formative assessments. They're definitely common across the school. They can even be common across the district. So I think that as we start developing our curriculums and getting them a little bit more fleshed out for science, then that's probably going to be that goal will probably be more realized than it is right now, to really have 3-dimensional opportunities to really look at students' understanding. So this is just kind of our day-to-day thinking around teaching and learning. What is it that my kids need to continue to develop in relation to the 3D standards? I'll spend just a little bit of time talking about the state summative assessment, which I'll give you some more of the logistics at our learning workshop. But this is the format of this assessment is going to be very different than we've experienced before, but the platform that we approach it is going to be pretty similar. So in the past, we've always assessed science in 4th grade, 7th grade, and 11th grade. That's going to be the same with the new science assessment system. We're still going to have the end-of-the-year summative at 4th grade, an end-of-the-year summative at 7th, and an end-of-the-year summative in 11th grade. And the platform for that is still going to be paper and pencil, just as it has been in the past. The way that it looks is going to be quite different, and I'll give you more information, and we can look at some examples and samples of that a little later. But right now, I'll just give you some of the nuts and bolts about it. Basically, it's to provide a big picture understanding of a school science program and their level of achievement based on the new NGSS standards. We're really looking at identifying a percentage of students that are meeting the expected levels of attainment, particularly as they explain phenomenon, use models, solve problems, use practices, core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So basically what that's saying is this assessment is really designed to help us look at our schools' science programs, and are we really growing scientific thinking and reasoning from kindergarten up through 4th. This is also going to give us a little bit more specific information around the students and what their level of understanding is in relation to the three dimensions and how they're putting all of that together to explain a phenomenon. So like we had mentioned earlier, phenomenon is really kind of like the anchor that allows kids to think through all three of the dimensions. So a lot of our state summative assessments, they will be anchored in a phenomenon that the kids have to utilize the three dimensions in order to explain it and to really think through and make meaning of what's going on within this phenomenon. So that's going to happen at the end of the year, K-Prep assessment time. This year's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a field test, and that's going to be in March. I'll give you some more of that information at our learning workshop, but there's a slide here on it. There's a testing window from March the 13th through the 17th. There's a couple of in and outs that I want to talk with you guys through, so I'll save a lot of that details into learning workshop, and then I'll have an opportunity for you to kind of ask some questions around that so I can clarify some things. It'll look a lot different than what we've seen in the past. Before, it was a ton of multiple choice questions that really kind of looked at vocabulary and just some scientific understandings and concepts, but didn't really get to any application processes or really thinking like a scientist. They didn't have an opportunity to ask questions or to develop models or to really carry out investigations or to plan one. And so this is going to be a paper pencil test like the others have been, but it's going to be anchored in a phenomenon, and throughout, I think there's going to be a couple of clusters. So each cluster is going to have a phenomenon that it's anchored in. It's going to have 6 or 7 selected responses, not exactly multiple choice, similar to multiple choice, but not exactly. It's going to have some diagrams and some models that are labeled that the kids will be able to choose some of their answers from and kind of move labels. Oh, well, that was the computer version. So it's going to be kind of similar, but it's not going to be exactly like an A, B, C, and D, and you just bubble one answer in. It's going to be they'll have an opportunity to select the responses a little in a different format. And if you're in 4th grade, you've seen examples of this, and I can show you some more of those also. And each cluster is also going to have 2 or 3 constructed responses, so they're going to have an opportunity to really develop an explanation of what's occurring and their understanding of it. So that is one cluster. They're going to have about 2 to 3 clusters. So each cluster is really going to be pulling together 2 or 3 performance expectations, and they're not, the context, the content isn't always going to revolve around the only thing that they've seen, like in 4th grade. So for a 4th grade state summative assessment, it's going to be fair game for them to see disciplinary core ideas that has spanned from kindergarten on to 4th grade. So the scientific ideas and understandings are going to be K through 4. A lot of the science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts are probably going to be developed from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade standards. So I'll give you more information and some examples of that a little bit later. 4th grade, you guys have seen a couple of these examples, and we're going to spend some time kind of working through some more of these later. Just more explanation of that, of the constructed response. Now, the through course task is where we're going to spend most of our time talking in our learning workshop. And so basically, this is to provide a snapshot of student learning and thinking around the 3 dimensions of the standards, really to kind of help calibrate our understanding of student thinking and to what level we should be expecting or hoping, of really working towards. And then also for us to make some good next step decisions. And so this is a little bit more formalized in that it's not every teacher creating one on their own. Over the last year, there's been a lot of teachers across the state working with KDE consultants and creating through course tasks. And they're a little bit more, rigorous than maybe some of our regular classroom embedded assessments. They're anchored in a phenomenon, like our state summative assessment, and they are really pulling together, they're really focused in on the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. This one's a little bit different because we're not getting to the depth of assessing the disciplinary core ideas. The disciplinary core idea that they're going to need to have an understanding of in order to anchor them in this phenomenon is going to be explained within the prompt. So they're not going to have to come with a ton of background knowledge around this particular scientific idea, but they are going to have to have some scientific understanding from years past to really think through the cross-cutting concepts, like what kinds of patterns are existing, maybe in this data. How is energy impacting this particular phenomenon? What are the systems at play here? So they're going to be having to think big picture of their learning of science across grade levels. And then they're also going to have to be thinking about through their science and engineering practices. So this might have an opportunity for them to develop a claim, analyzing or interpreting data. They might be planning an investigation. They might not carry out the investigation during this assessment, but they might create a plan for an investigation. They might even engage in arguments from evidence. They might construct an explanation. They might think mathematically and using computational thinking. So the purpose of the through course task is to assess the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts that are anchored through the disciplinary core ideas. So they're not necessarily assessing the disciplinary core ideas. That's just an anchor for their thinking. And these are going to be on a website, which I'm going to give you, and you're going to have an opportunity to choose which through course task you want to use with your kiddos. So there's some choice in it, really depending on what you've been teaching up until a certain point and what really kind of aligns with your instruction and your pacing. So you're going to have opportunity to choose a through course task that more aligns with what you want to get at. There's not a ton of resources up yet. Most grade levels have 2. But as the years go on, we're going to have more and more through course tasks, which will allow us to have more choice. So right now our choices are a little limited, but it's going to increase as the years progress. So you're going to get to choose one from this web. You're going to be able to plan instruction around it, which I'm going to talk with you a little bit more about the process in our meeting. But basically, the through course task has a real process that they want us to go through, and I'm going to talk to you about how we're going to support you through this process. So within a through course task, part of the piece is planning for the task of the facilitation. Facilitating the task is you actually giving the task to the students, and then the post-task analysis is an opportunity for you to analyze student understanding, like through a data team process. And so in the coming weeks after our learning workshop, I'm going to schedule a team planning time with you and your team where we're going to look at the options of the through course tasks that are available to you. I'm going to give you an opportunity to choose one of those that you think most align with your instruction at this point. And then you're going to go through it like a student. You're going to take the assessment. You're going to think about what level are they really requiring students to think through as far as these science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts are concerned. That really kind of helps you calibrate the depth. So it's going to help you kind of get through the depth of I guess, the rigor of what that task is requiring of you. And so after you've gone through it like a student and you've really thought about what the level and the success criteria really is going to be for this task, then it's an opportunity for us to spend some time planning, not just how you're going to give this task, but what is the learning, the learning unit going to be up until that point. Because it's not just a cold test that you give kids. It's not something you just hand to them and say, here, go and do it. There's a lot of flexibility in how we approach this. And I'll come and share a lot more with you about that when we meet in your team planning. But you are going to be supported throughout this whole process. I'm going to be there to walk you through the whole thing. So we're going to do a lot of planning around how to get to all of those pieces on the through course task process. Then you're going to actually give the task. And then we're going to come together through a data team and analyze student work and discover and uncover what the next steps for student learning is going to be. So when we get to our learning workshop on Tuesday, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and clarify some things, and we're going to experience a 3D learning opportunity. Thank you.